The objective was to investigate the future, to look over the horizon, to see what was coming that's going to impact our lives, our family lives, our business lives, how governments are going to work, how populations are changing. We're going to share some of those ideas with you today. We're going to look at the highlights and what do we find from the report. I think some of the key findings here are going to impact the globe. So globalization, populations, the size of the population of our planet moving from 3 billion to 9 billion in just 100 years, 3 billion more people in just the last 50 years. So if you think about the workforce, our consumers, how we operate, where we operate in the world, that's all changing at a dramatic rate. Think about our economies for a moment. Just the last 20 years, we've doubled the world economy to $60 trillion. In the next 20 years, we're moving again another $60 trillion of economic activity. And within the next 40 years, we will have trebled that to almost $200 trillion. The impact is enormous. With new populations, with new consumers, with new economic growth of this sort of magnitude, there's no way in the world that we'll be living in the same environment we are today. So if we consider some of the other factors that we found in this report, think about the resources we're going to be using. It's unlikely that we'll continue to use the resources on the planet in the same way. We're going to have to conserve more, create energy in new ways, more sustainably. We're going to need to look after the resources that we make our technology from. So there'll be very different changing pressures on how we employ technology, where we employ it, and what purposes we use for it. Think about food. The rate at which our populations are growing, we're going to need to double food production in just the next 40 years. What does this mean for business? If you're involved in any way with the genetic modification, with bio-agricultural developments, whatever those industries are, they're set to grow 400% and 600%, literally in the next 20, 30 years. That's going to impact all their supply chain and anybody who's involved in helping those firms establish themselves and create that sort of activity. These new industries are growing rapidly with biopharmaceuticals, bio-agricultural, genetically modified crops, enormous potential for fast growth and fast growing industries. The service sector itself is set to grow roughly 800% in Europe alone as we move from our manufacturing base to increasingly a high intellectual property, high IP economy with increasing services provided to the world's economies and world markets. Over the last 50 years, technology has been a cornerstone of the growth and change in how we run our businesses and how we run our enterprises and our markets. If we consider from the 50s onwards, we've had the mainframe, then the Mini, then personal computers and Unix departmental servers. We're now moving to smartphones and iPads and small tablets. We'll move to scrollables, avatars, virtual reality worlds, artificial intelligence on knowledge-based systems, over smart infrastructure that allows us to share knowledge and content and capabilities across the world. What we're sure about, of course, is that we need smart talent to run these, and we need smart organizations to implement these effectively. The O3B project, the other 3 billion project, will allow us to connect up to 5 billion people in the next 3 years. Currently, the internet community is literally 1.9 billion people, and we're moving to 5 billion. The impact on that will not just be digital consumers on board. We'll increasingly have new people contributing their knowledge and skills. We'll have people contributing their wares and products. And we'll have people taking part in an even more globalized world than we've had up to now. This change is going to be highly disruptive in many ways. And we will need to see how we can adapt ourselves, our businesses, our governments and our organizations to integrate with this fast-growing internet population. Social media has come out, of course, as one of the big drivers of change in our behaviours. We're able to connect with more people more often in more circumstances than ever before. We've become used to being able to connect with people anywhere at any time. And this, of course, is going to influence how we work and where we work and when we work. If you just consider Facebook, for example, 3 years ago we would have been talking about MySpace. Today it's a community in Facebook of 700 million people, moving to 1 billion people in under a year. In the summer this year, Facebook announced that they would introduce Facebook credits and mandate that everybody in their communities would use their credits only, creating a new currency for the world to consume. You can watch TV, video, communicate with anybody at any time, and in the future, of course, even greater access to products and services, with 400 stores opening every day in that world, all using Facebook credits. These new currencies will increasingly impact how governments can control their monetary and fiscal policies in their economies. As global players invent their own, the potential of communities across economic boundaries, across regulatory boundaries, across taxation boundaries, being involved in work and being involved in trade, and yet outside of the monetary environment is tremendous and exciting and challenging, depending what perspective you have. I mentioned populations a moment ago, the explosive growth in this population. What's even more dramatic in many ways is the rate at which we started living in cities. If you go back to 1950, there were about 1 billion people on the planet living in cities. In the next 40 years, there will be 6.3 billion people, 600% increase. The number of cities themselves are increasing dramatically, with 160 new cities forecast in the next 40 years to be above 10 million people. 100 of those cities are going to be in China. If you just think about how the Asian economies have impacted so much in the world, today there are 8 cities in the top cities of the world in Asia. In the next 20 years there'll be 20 cities in that group. The change is revolutionary in terms of how we live and where we live. In the future, our cities will have to be self-sustaining to the greater extent as they become larger and more dense, with increasing numbers of people working, playing, living, experiencing life within their cities. We'll have to manage waste within the city, we'll have to manage the production of food within the city, we'll have to manage communication and transportation in a way that's smart and integrated and uses resources to the greatest possible extent for the benefit of everybody. All of this will have to be done in an environmentally sustainable way to create a living environment and a working environment that's attractive and creates competitive advantage for the people of those cities in those countries. This is a whole new paradigm. We've barely seen this start. We're literally 50 years into this new way of living in the world, and we're moving ahead and multiplying at a tremendous rate. Any organisations involved in creating this environment are going to be set for boom in the coming years.